Welcome to the Busy Signal. My name is Jim, and this is my retro-nostalgic 80s, 90s, and early 2000s podcast. This show aims to salute all the stuff from back in the day that is either now extinct or quickly going that way. All right, as we all know, next week is the big game. You know that game. NFL's biggest game of the year. Rhymes with Super Bowl. For me as a kid, the big game, I didn't care about football, but the big game brought on the commercials, all the advertisements, millions of dollars, celebrities, cleverness, fun stuff every year. And that was my favorite part of the Super Bowl. It was the commercials. And once again, I'm joined by my buddy Korey Oats, and we are talking about some of the most iconic, funny, clever commercials that aired during the big game during the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Korey, welcome back.
What's going on?
Nothing much. We've had some homework over the last week. What, 30 years of commercials?
Brother, I don't know if you've heard this. I, being born in 1989, decided to do my own homework, and I started with the year I was born, 1989, and watch every commercial from 1989 up until I made it to like 04, and then I just kind of tapped out there. But that was hours and hours and hours of commercials, and you can just see, and we'll talk about it, but over the years, how things changed from mainly being these handful of categories to other things as the years progressed.
Oh yeah, the commercials have definitely progressed. Like you said, they've gone from very basic to cinematic, even multi-part, where they've got teaser trailers a month beforehand. They make the news headlines. It's really wild to see where it went from when I was a kid in the 80s to where it is now. It's just almost out of control at this point. And the list that we're going to go through of commercials is not ranked in order. It's just a smattering of what we thought was the best or most memorable and completely our own opinions. So without further delay, I'm going to kick it into one of the biggest brands that is dominant every year in the Super Bowl, Budweiser. In 1995, we got a new commercial featuring frogs. You remember that commercial? I mean, how old were you in 95?
I was 5, but honestly, that was the first one that I remembered. I'd been taking copious amounts of notes as we went through each big game. 95 being the Bud Frogs, that was the first one I remember. Technically, and it wasn't because I watched the Super Bowl. That's because that one was just mainstream. After the Super Bowl, that one picked up on every single channel after it that I got, wind of the Bud Frogs.
Oh, it took a life of its own. I was 14, and when that commercial came out, it was almost like if you were in class, somebody randomly would go, Bud, and somebody else would, two other people had to finish it. Why, sir? It was the frogs. They're out on this lily pad. And it didn't happen right away. It was a very slow commercial at first. It was just a frog saying, Bud, Bud. And then another frog would say, wise, but it wasn't in any kind of rhythm yet. And then you had an with another frog, and then it was out of rhythm and out of sync and sometimes out of order until they got it right. And then it flowed, and then one frog almost even looked at another frog, and they were cognizant of, all right, we got something here, and it was Budweiser. And then it kind of pans out, and you can see there's like this bar with a Budweiser symbol on it.
In like a swamp.
They're like a swamp. What is this, like Louisiana? Are they in the Everglades? What is this? But I thought it was a good commercial because all of a sudden everybody is saying Budweiser. I mean, as far as a brand goes, the tagline is your brand and everybody's saying it. That's gold right there.
Yeah, right there. That's your brand awareness too.
Yeah. I mean, it's not even like a catchphrase, like something different and you think of your brand. No, everybody's literally saying your brand name.
Yeah, and if there's one thing, like I've said, going back to even when I started watching in 1989 when I was watching these, you didn't have Bud commercials. It was the Bud Bowl. They had these almost like animated Budweiser versus Bud Light game that was taking place during it. So like in 1989 was the Bud Bowl 1, and they'd come back and there was random commercials that basically were like in-game things, and they kind of made it fun and interactive, and at the end of the game was that. As the years go on, you still don't have many Bud commercials. It's more of these Bud Bowls every year, and they changed. Eventually, there was like a thing where you could get like these tickets, and then it was like, if you have the final score, hopefully if your ticket has this, send it in, you could win $1 million. And then there's this one where the guy's like, his wife throws it out, and then he goes through all these crazy things, gets it back, wins, and then his dog takes the ticket. Like,
Oh, that's hilarious.
yeah, I want to say that's the Bud Bowl 5. They did 7 of them.
They did 7?
7, yes. Some years they had Chris Berman on them. One year I think they might have had, no, it wasn't John Madden, but they had another announcer. I didn't note who that was, but it became less and less. By the 7th one, it was literally like, hey, here's the score, like one commercial, and like if you had this ticket, send it in. That, I guess at that point was when the crossover, and you started to see, because that would have been 96 was the last one they did. So 95, when you get the Bud Frogs also crossing with it, that's when you start to get every year, here's 5 or 6 different Bud Light / Budweiser commercials, and they just plastered all over the game.
I do think there was some burnout on the Bud Bowl. There were some people that didn't want to watch it, but it was a big deal. The Frogs, that was very novel and fun at first. And then, I mean, it took a life of its own. And after a few years, I got sick of people saying Budweiser. I'll tell you what, there were some people that hung on to it a little too long.
Yeah. But as we can talk, I don't know how many other things you're going to talk about, but that was 95. 97 was the year they brought in the Lizards.
I don't remember the Lizards. I don't remember those.
You don't remember the Lizards? I remember the Lizards more than the Frogs, because the Lizard commercial, there was 4 of them in 97. Wait, was it 97? No, it was 98. I lied. It was 98. They brought it back, and it's basically now panned out in the swamp. There's 2 lizards.
Were they iguanas?
Maybe it's iguanas. It was a 4-part commercial during the game, where it starts where basically they like electrocute the water to quote unquote kill the frogs, because like they're just annoyed by the frogs that are still doing nothing but saying that. And then you get to like a commercial or 2 later and the frogs are still alive and they just start again and they're just like going nuts. And then by the last one they have to more or less say like, hey, like we didn't like kill anybody or something, like kill any animals in this. It was like really strange. Yes,
funny.
there's 4 parts, 1998.
I got to go back and watch that. That's funny.
Yeah.
Because the next thing I remember for Budweiser, I must have missed that. I don't know where I was. 98, I was like 17. Maybe I didn't even watch the Super Bowl that year. But there was no escaping Budweiser's 2000 commercial.
Wassup! Yes. No, that is legendary. That is legendary. I'm a wrestling guy, and that was immediately in 2000 brought into a wrestling group's like a part of a move they did, and they still do that in 2024. Because of that commercial in 2000.
I'm completely a hypocrite because I just said that people hung on to Budweiser too long, but me and my dad still greet each other on the phone most times with "What's up?" and my mom completely rolls her eyes. Like it's 2024 and I'm still saying "What's up?" to my dad, and it's still just as funny to me as it was in 2000, which is kind of sick. But it's the guys that are in the apartment and somebody calls and he answers the phone "What's up?" and then it just gets more and more animated. Somebody's on the intercom downstairs with a 6-pack of Bud. What's up? And yo Duque, picks up the phone. What's up? And then at the end when they're all doing it at the same time.
Yeah, and it's just the cut. Yeah. Do you remember that they ran that back in 2001 with Aliens?
No, I missed that. I remember the other. I knew there were several versions. I remember the sushi house, the sushi restaurant with the wasabi. All the sushi chefs.
Yeah,
and they wasabi.
Yes. That too. But I don't think that was necessarily a Super Bowl commercial. I think that was just a follow up from the original that they just kind of Yeah.
That I loved that one. I think there was even. Before memes were a thing, I came across that Budweiser. It was the audio from the original "What's Up" commercial, but it was like the Super Friends, like the old Super Friends cartoon.
Amazing.
And it was really funny to see like, Wonder Woman and Superman and they're all "What's up?" It was hilarious. Because I think you like the Super Friends a little
love
bit, right?
the Super Friends. Yeah.
You got to find that.
I didn't even really follow any type of superhero anything until I watched reruns of the Super Friends in like the late 90s.
And I'm not even really a superhero person, like period, but that's funny. Like it's a meme before memes, honestly. So then getting off of Budweiser for a while, we'll probably come back to them because they're just all over every Super Bowl. Pepsi was another big company that always made sure they had an over-the-top commercial. And in 1992, they were repackaging their product in a new can. And that's a big deal to change the way your brand looks. You've got to do it in such a way that people don't reject it. And the only way to do that is to bring on the biggest celebrities of the time and make it kind of flashy. That's what Pepsi did in 1992 with their commercial, A New Can. Did you watch that one?
Yeah. Oh, of course. With Doris Troy, Just One Look in the background. I'm just
Yes.
jamming along, and you got these two youngsters.
It looks like it's like somewhere out in like Route 66 in like,
Yeah,
Midwest somewhere. And then what? That's a Lamborghini that pulls up, right?
that I couldn't tell you. I'm not a car guy.
Sure, that's a Lambo. And who gets out? The biggest supermodel of the time, Cindy Crawford, with her big hair, thick eyebrows, white tank top, and cut off, what are those? Daisy Dukes, I guess you would call those.
Yeah,
And she walks up to a Pepsi
machine.
vending machine at this old gas station. You can see an old like Chevy truck in the background. Maybe it's a Ford. I don't know. But those kids are just like, their eyes are glued over there now because like, whoa, like she gets a Pepsi can out of the vending machine and she just looks like she's hot. Like maybe that Lambo, while it's fast, maybe it doesn't have air conditioning. And man, she just starts draining that can, and her hair is like waving back and forth and the kids are just looking right at her. You think, what does the one kid say? Oh, he goes, is that a great Pepsi can or what?
Yeah, basically because you had to. The punchline at the end had to be essentially they didn't care about the girl. They're like gawking all over the Pepsi can, which is amazing.
Right. And the other kid goes, it's beautiful. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
There you go.
And that commercial has been spoofed a couple times over the years. I think James Corden did a version of that with just him in a white tank top, which, yikes.
But if you know, you know. Nice little
Right.
callback is always, funny with a wink and a nod.
Absolutely. And then Cindy Crawford did do it again. They recreated it. And, she doesn't age. She still looks great.
I don't remember the remake.
Yeah, they remade it. I mean, sometime within the last 10 years.
But it makes sense because they have to remake every other movie. So let's just remake commercials that people remember.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a throwback. Everybody that remembers, oh, remember that. And oh, she kind of still looks like Cindy Crawford. So there you go.
Yeah. I mean, real quick, I'm going to get, as again, we keep talking about these things, but some notes about Pepsi. I don't know if we're necessarily coming back to Pepsi, but when I started in 1989, this is a teaser, but in 1989, my first year I watched, I had two notes of that one. One is something we'll talk about, but this one says so many Coke and Pepsi commercials.
But it makes sense that in the late 80s and the early 90s, you had these cola commercials because that was the height of the cola wars. Like Pepsi went on like a national tour in like sometime in the mid 80s and you took the Pepsi challenge. They'd set up a booth and there'd be two cups and they wouldn't be labeled and you'd sit down and you would tell them, they'd ask you which was your favorite, Coke or Pepsi, and you tell them, oh, I love Coke. Coke is my favorite. I like Coke way better than Pepsi. And you do this taste test and they'd say, which one did you like better? And they'd say, oh, I like A. And then they'd flip over the card for A. And it was, oh, you just drank a Pepsi. And the Coke lover would be like, oh my gosh, I like Pepsi apparently. And that was like big, like that started the Coke and, the cola wars. So that leads me into the next commercial, which is Pepsi's 1995 delivery guys. Coke was always number one. I think it still is number one. So this commercial was like, it was a big deal. And that's honestly one of my favorite commercials because of the premise, the context of the cola wars. I just thought this was a huge missile at Coke. And you've got this diner on like a cold winter's night. And, it's kind of sparsely occupied. And, a Pepsi truck rolls in and parks. And the Pepsi delivery guy gets out and he's going into the diner. He's taking his coat off and he walks up to the counter and says to the waitress, I'd like whatever in a Pepsi. Sits down. And then the camera pans out and down the counter is already a Coke delivery guy. And he's enjoying his meal and a Coke. And they look at each other. And in the background of the diner is playing that song from the Youngbloods. It's that very like hippie, like, smile on your brother. Come on, let's get together song.
Yes.
Yeah. And the one guy says, good song. And the Coke guy says, great song. And now you've got two dudes that like the same song. They look at each other. They have instantly bonded, even though they are enemies. Before you know it, they're sitting next to each other at the counter. The wallets come out and family pictures because, we didn't have phones back then. It was family pictures in your wallet. And they're laughing and they're almost they're sharing hardships of their job. Like, long nights. It's hard on the kids. They're slapping each other on the back. And then the Coke guy takes his chance. He shoots his shot. He takes that Coke that he's got in front of him and he slides it over to the Pepsi delivery guy. And I wish I could remember the name of the Pepsi delivery guy, like in real life, the actor, because he recently passed. And he was, I know he was a great character actor, but I specifically remember him as the Tooth Fairy in the Santa Claus movies with Tim Allen.
Yes.
Yes. The Molinator, he liked to call himself, because the Tooth Fairy was a little, he didn't like that. He wanted something a little bit more manly.
Yes.
So he looks at this Coke that's been slid in front of him, and then he looks around like he's a little schoolboy, like, I shouldn't be doing this. And then he grabs the Coke and he takes a small sip, puts it down, and gives like a nod to the Coke guy, like, all right, it's not so bad, And then he does the same thing. He slides his Pepsi over to the Coke guy, and the Coke guy, looks around, makes sure that nothing's going on, and the waitresses are watching. They think it's very cute that this like exchange is happening. And then he takes a sip, and the Pepsi guy goes to get his Pepsi back, and the Coke guy goes, no, I can't do that. And then it cuts out to the diner front, and boom, there's a chair being thrown through the window, and the cola wars are back on. You thought that they were making nice, and boom, it's back. Pepsi's like, nope.
That was one thing that when I remember seeing that commercial, that was kind of after I was like, I haven't seen a Coke commercial in a while. And I went back and checked my notes, and the Coke commercials stopped. But like when you look back, like they were, as we said, they were iconic. In 1990, I'm going to go through these because I really thought that was important. Quick run through them. Diet Pepsi, that was the Ray Charles, where he's got the piano and he sings, it's right. They mock that in Rookie of the Year, which is one of my favorite, sports movies as a kid. And I was like, that's where this is from? And looking every year, they basically recreated that for like 2 years straight. They would bring Ray Charles in every year and redo that one. And then same thing, Diet Coke had things too. But you get to that 95 one that we're just talking about, or 96, whatever year that was, and that was the commercial. There was no Coke, like even comeback. And I'll continue to say, for years after that, I've not seen another Coke commercial. And I watched up to, like I said, 04. So I don't know why Coke just bailed out. It could be that they're just, people have brand awareness of us and they're going to just find us. We don't need to spend the money that you spend per 30 seconds to advertise in the Super Bowl. But I still found it very interesting. I mean, you get up to the 2002 or 2003 with Britney Spears.
Right, the next generation, yeah.
The late 90s was Generation Next. She's still, the big thing. I think that one, they basically recreate a bunch of different older Pepsi commercials, just have her placed in them, and then it's just this montage.
Yeah, that was like a 3-minute commercial.
Yes,
but
then it gets chopped up.
It does, yes. The lack of Coke commercials, I think, is Coke's response saying, we're number one. We actually don't need to do this.
Right.
Have fun. Because I think Pepsi then changes. It says, okay, we've done the Cola Wars thing. We're going to focus on us now. In 97, they partner up with Lucasfilms, and they do a Star Wars Pepsi commercial. Because in 1997, we were still living in a world where there was only 3 Star Wars movies. We had the Star Wars trilogy. I don't even know what you would call it now. It's just a franchise. And they were bringing back all 3 Star Wars films, digitally remastered, in the movie theater. We hadn't had a new Star Wars movie since the early to mid 80s. It was like Return of the Jedi was like, what, 84 maybe?
Sounds right.
So we hadn't had a Star Wars movie in like 13 years or so. And we're like, all right, put them back in the movie theater. But little did we know that in a couple of years they were going to release Phantom Menace and we were getting more Star Wars. We didn't know that. But it's a great commercial. I don't really particularly care for Star Wars. It's not my bag, but I can appreciate a clever commercial. And you've got this movie theater, big movie theater, and there's this kid, and he's sucking on this movie theater cup of Pepsi. He's with the straw, and it's that slurping noise, and it's echoing through the whole movie theater. And Darth Vader is on the screen, turns around. He's clearly annoyed that this slurping is going on, puts his hand out through the screen, and does uses the Force and crushes the kid's cup. Meanwhile, you've got the movie theater usher. He's got his uniform on and his cap and his flashlight. And he goes, hey, pick on someone your own size. Turns on his flashlight, and it's a lightsaber. And before you know it, Darth Vader and the movie theater usher are having a lightsaber battle. And the lightsabers are waving back and forth, and it's cutting people's hair off and stuff, and people's heads are smoking. And the one at the end of it, there's one like teenager that's like, oh, these are rad special effects or something like that, because special effects were a thing back then. Nowadays, it's just, we don't even think about special effects. It's just, we expect special effects. But back then, the special effects are rad, man. It's awesome. As far as I don't care for Pepsi, I don't care for Star Wars, but it is a clever commercial.
I know that you're trying to get off this Pepsi thing, but I just have 3 quick notes to hit. 1993, Crystal Pepsi. Do you remember Crystal Pepsi?
Not only do I remember Crystal Pepsi, but it was just disgusting. It was sickeningly sweet. It was gross.
1995, they basically recreate Field of Dreams, and the guy's dad comes back through the outfield, and he walks up and he expects there to be a Pepsi, and the son hands him like this like off-brand name soda, and he's like, I came back for this, and then he just leaves.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that. I remember that commercial.
And then in 96, there's one where they have a pet fish, and they like pour the Pepsi in there, and the fish, they think he's dead, but he's just acting dead. The second he gets Pepsi, he starts doing all these tricks, but he does that to like get a little treat of Pepsi or something like that. And then the dad ends up like flushing the fish because he thinks he's dead.
Oh man, I remember that one too. I forget. There's a lot. We're probably going to end up doing another one of these a year from now, and I want to. Yeah, I'm gonna have. There's so many. I mean, we're doing 30 years of commercials condensed down, but yeah, there's a lot, and that I remember that one. That man, you're unlocking memories all over the place. To move on from Pepsi and to go back to Budweiser, I thought it was worth mentioning this Budweiser commercial in 2002. But you've got the Clydesdales. They're getting ready. They're in their barn. They're getting hitched up. They're getting hooked up to a very old school Budweiser, red cart. And they start trudging through, this snowy like woods. And before you know it, they're on the Brooklyn Bridge. And there's nobody else on the Brooklyn Bridge. It's just them, and they are dressed to the nines. And then I guess they're going through like Central Park, kind of, because it's like an open field. So they're probably in Central Park. And you can see in the background the Statue of Liberty, and they are standing in front of the New York skyline. And it is sans the Twin Towers. This is respect to the tragedy of 9/11, because then all of a sudden, all of the horses, and I think there's probably 8 of them, all of them bend a knee and bow their heads. And there are no words during this commercial. It's just all just like somber, like music, hopeful music though, but it's not like sad, but it is a little hopeful. And I'm not going to lie, that got me choked up a little bit watching that one again, because it makes you feel like what happened again. And I thought it was a really tasteful commercial, honestly.
Yeah, and
I don't know if you remember that commercial.
I didn't, and I was telling you, I watched all of the. I was like, here's a year, let me watch all of them, and I watched it, and I kind of didn't think anything of it, but I'm also watching it with 2024 eyes, and I think the problem was I was looking for what stands out to me, and as dumb as it sounds, like that was just a very like, it was made to be a respectful tribute, and because of that, it wasn't something that was like energetic and crazy and something that stuck out to me until I watched it again, and I was like, oh, think about it. It was 2002. It was only at that point, we're 5 months removed from that, and so it hit a lot more that way, but I honestly don't remember it even airing because of that, but that they did a great job with that. I will say that. They
didn't even put their brand. I mean, the Budweiser logo wasn't anywhere. The cart was filmed from far away, and it did say Budweiser, but in a very plain font. They didn't put up any kind of advertising for their product or anything. It was just acknowledging what happened here and kind of like standing in unity with the people of New York City. I thought it was great. You don't see that very often, and I thought it was good for them to do that. At that time, in that context, I really appreciated that, even though I'm not a Budweiser person either. And that's not where we're going to end this podcast, because we just brought it way down. I want to kick it over to one of my 100% favorite commercials of most recent times. Like I've said, we'll take this podcast to around 2010, and that's where we're going. 2010 with Snickers. You know where I'm going with this, right?
Yes.
Betty White. It starts out with a full contact football game with a bunch of dudes, and all of a sudden you see Betty White in like a tracksuit amongst these young guys, and you're like, whoa, what's going on? And then before you know it, she gets tackled at full speed right into the dirt, and you're like, whoa, that's kind of jarring to see like an old person get completely taken out. And then you see her and she's fine, and she goes up into the huddle afterwards, and they're like, come on, man, you're playing like Betty White. And she's like, oh, come on, man, you've been riding me all day, And some other guy says something, and she comes back with this, like,
that's not what your girlfriend said.
I'm like, whoa, this is wild. This is insane. And then all of a sudden this girl comes in and she's like, babe. And you're like, you realize she's talking to this Betty White, like very familiar. And she's like, have a Snickers. And Betty White takes a bite of the Snickers. And all of a sudden it's not Betty White anymore. It's just some random dude. And it's his girlfriend. And she's like, better? And he's like, yeah. Like, that was hilarious to me. It was a very fast commercial. It was a very fast paced commercial. And I think it needed to be because it was jarring all over the place. And it was brilliant.
That's one of the first, you're not you when you're hungry. I think it may have morphed into that phrase, but like that was, I think, like the first one that did that. I think they still do that now with commercials. This is where it started. And I remember this commercial as well. And it's just like, that was one of those decisions that it paid off. You know, when you have an idea that pays off like that and you can just keep running it back for years on end, like that pays itself in dividends, including the fact that you were able to get Betty White, to take a nice bump. Although it was definitely probably a double, but I don't know how they cropped that is just genius.
It was great. And I think at the end of this, and that's my last commercial, I think, and we'll save some for next year. I think at the end of this, they all kind of have this common theme where it's just like, if you can create a catchphrase, you're golden for like a couple years at least on your marketing campaign. Mm-hmm. The one thing that I can think of that did not really last long was Diet Pepsi. I had a slogan that came out like 2006, and they were referring to their product as brown and bubbly. And that just makes me think of like, I need to call a plumber because my toilet has backed up. So I'm just like, I don't think they stuck with brown and bubbly for very long, and because it was awful. But yeah, Korey, thanks for joining me once again on the big game commercials. It was really a lot of fun. If you want to tell people where they can find you at, now's your time.
I'm going to do that real quick, but I will also say with the little teasers, there's just so many things that I have that I want to talk about. So I'm looking forward to being able to maybe talk about some of the, I guess, less iconic ones and some other ones that might trigger some core memories for people in the future, because I have so many notes here, and I'm looking forward to talking about some of these in the future. But yeah, Korey Oats on Instagram, host of the Record Hop every single Thursday night on WZML 92.9, Philly's classic alternative. You can just look on the TuneIn radio app, and you can stream that thing anywhere. I play all the old dance music from the 60s through the 90s, 7 to midnight on a Thursday. I have a couple of beverages, and we have a good time.
Excellent. Once again, thanks again for joining me, and we will see you next time. I'm not sure what we're going to do next time, but I have some ideas. We'll be talking.
Sounds good, man.
All right. Thanks a lot, Korey. Once again, I just want to say thanks for listening. And as always, you can listen to The Busy Signal everywhere quality podcasts are streamed. Hit the subscribe button to have a new episode delivered directly to your favorite device every other Friday. And if you really enjoy the show, leave a positive review. I don't know what that does, but would this be a real podcast if I didn't ask for that? You can also head over to Instagram and follow the show at Busy Signal Cast for even more retrostalgic content. I share a good amount of stuff that isn't mentioned on the episodes. And while you're there, say hi in the comments. And until next time, remember, reach out and touch the past.